Jake Miller, a 35-year-old flight attendant, stepped out of the airport after 5 straight days of flying from New York to London and back to Chicago. His legs felt weak, his eyes stung from lack of sleep, and even the cold December air couldn't fully wake his exhausted body. As he walked toward the parking lot, he kept thinking about home, not his small Chicago apartment, but his parents' quiet house in Maplewood. "I just need their warmth for one night," he whispered, gripping his suitcase tightly. Jake imagined his mother, Sarah, preparing his favorite roasted beef, and his father, Daniel, telling old stories at the dinner table. That hopeful image alone carried him to the car and pushed him to start the long night drive straight toward Maplewood. The familiar highway stretched before him, empty except for scattered cars gliding under the yellow streetlights. Jake drove with the window slightly open, letting in the smell of light rain mixed with winter air, hoping it would keep him awake. As he approached Maplewood, the houses with white fences and tall trees brought a small smile to his tired face. "Almost home," he murmured, gripping the steering wheel as excitement rose inside him. But when he turned into his parents' street, something felt strange and unnervingly quiet. The porch lights that Sarah always left on were dark, and the iron gate carried a chain and padlock Daniel rarely used, leaving Jake frozen in confusion. He switched off the engine and sat still, staring at the silent house that once felt alive with warmth. "Mom? Dad?" he whispered, as if the darkness might answer him. No lights flickered from the windows, no dog barked, and even his father's old van was missing from its usual spot. Jake grabbed his phone with trembling hands and dialed Daniel first, waiting as the phone rang endlessly without an answer. Then he tried calling Sarah, and again, the rings stretched on like empty echoes in the night. A cold uneasiness crept into his chest, whispering that something was terribly wrong. Unable to sit any longer, Jake stepped out into the cold night, the wind slicing across his skin as he headed toward the familiar home next door. Mrs. Ruth Harris, the elderly neighbor who had known him since he was born, finally opened her door after several knocks. "Jake? My goodness, you're back. Why so late?" she asked, pulling her robe tighter around her. Jake swallowed nervously and asked if she had seen his parents lately or noticed anything unusual. Mrs. Ruth's expression softened with worry before she gently pulled him onto the porch and sighed. "Jake, a few days ago, I saw your parents packing the van. They said they had to leave for a while, but they looked troubled." Jake stood frozen as her words hit him like a cold wave, leaving his breath shallow and mind spinning. He asked quickly, "Did they tell you where they were going? Did something happen?" But Mrs. Ruth only shook her head sadly. She explained how she later spotted the old van parked near the small supermarket in town, hidden in a far corner like someone didn't want it to be seen. Jake thanked her in a daze, heart pounding as he rushed back to his car with trembling hands. Every worst possibility flashed through his mind as he drove toward the supermarket, the empty road stretching endlessly before him. Deep down, he already feared the truth he was about to face, but he pressed the accelerator harder, unable to stop himself. When Jake reached the supermarket, the entire parking lot sat under a pale yellow glow from the flickering streetlights. He drove slowly, scanning each corner with rising dread until he finally saw it, the old green van with peeling paint that Daniel had driven for years. His heart tightened as he parked beside it, stepping out into the cold air that bit sharply at his skin. "Please don't let this be what I think," he whispered, placing a trembling hand on the van's rusty door handle. When he slid the door open, a musty smell rushed out, and a dim light revealed 2 familiar silhouettes. Inside sat his parents, Daniel and Sarah, thin and weary, quietly eating stale bread off their laps. Jake froze, unable to breathe as he stared at their gaunt faces, the wrinkles deeper than he remembered, their clothes wrinkled and tired-looking. "Mom? Dad? What are you doing here?" he finally managed, voice cracking from shock. Sarah looked up slowly, eyes full of shame, before lowering her gaze again without speaking. Daniel sighed deeply, rubbing his forehead as if the weight of the world sat on his shoulders. The cramped van held only a few bags, dusty blankets, and half-empty water bottles, painting a harsh picture of how they had been living. Jake felt tears sting his eyes as he whispered, "You should have called me. Why didn't you call me?" His mother shook her head weakly, her hands trembling as she held the small piece of bread. Jake reached inside and gently helped her step out. Her legs were unsteady, and she leaned on him like she might collapse. He then helped Daniel out, noticing how his father avoided his eyes entirely, too ashamed to speak. "Let's go home," Jake said softly, guiding them toward his car with both fear and guilt tightening around his heart. The 3 of them rode in silence, the hum of the engine the only sound as Jake kept glancing at them in the rearview mirror. He wondered how long they had been living like this and why they hadn't reached out to him sooner, but the truth felt too painful to ask yet. They arrived at Jake's small Chicago apartment close to midnight, the hallway lights flickering as he helped his parents inside. "Sit here, please," he said, guiding them to the old sofa and rushing to turn on the heater. He wrapped them in blankets before hurrying to the kitchen to make soup from whatever he could find in the fridge. When he returned with 2 steaming bowls, Sarah's eyes watered as she whispered, "Thank you, Jake. I'm sorry you had to see us like this." Daniel drank slowly, avoiding his son's gaze, his silence heavier than any words he could have spoken. Jake sat across from them and said gently, "I need you both to tell me everything. Why were you living in that van?" Sarah glanced at Daniel before taking a shaky breath and finally speaking. "Jake, the house, our house, it's gone. It was sold," she said, her voice breaking as she lowered her eyes again. Jake felt the air leave his lungs as he leaned forward, asking, "Sold? By who? You didn't sign anything." Daniel raised a trembling hand and said softly, "Just listen first, son. Let me explain from the beginning." And with that, Jake braced himself as his father began telling a story that would change everything he believed about his younger brother. The room grew colder despite the heater as a rising storm of truth filled the space between them. Daniel leaned back on the sofa, tired eyes staring at the floor as he began recounting everything that had happened in the days Jake was flying across the world. He explained how Jake's younger brother, Adam, had arrived at the house with a group of strangers claiming to be buyers. They said the papers were signed, that the house now belonged to them, Daniel whispered, voice trembling. Sarah added, "We tried to tell them it wasn't possible, that the house was in your name, but they wouldn't listen." Adam stood aside saying nothing, only muttering that it would all be fixed soon, which made Jake's stomach twist with anger. By the time those men threatened to call the police, Sarah and Daniel had no choice but to pack their things and leave immediately. Jake's jaw tightened as he stared at his parents in disbelief, struggling to understand how his own brother could betray them again. "Adam sold the house?" he asked, voice low with rising fury. Daniel nodded slowly and whispered, "He forged your name, son. The documents looked real enough for them to force us out." Sarah grabbed Jake's hand with tears in her eyes and said, "Please don't be angry. We didn't want to bother you while you were working." Those words stabbed deeper than the betrayal itself, making guilt wash over Jake in waves. He stood abruptly, pacing as he muttered, "No, this time he crossed the line. I won't let him ruin your lives again." That same night, despite barely being able to keep his eyes open from exhaustion, Jake drove toward Adam's apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. The old building looked exactly as he remembered, run-down walls, dim hall lights, and the constant smell of cigarettes. He climbed the stairs quickly, fueled by anger, and found Adam's door partially open with loud music blaring. "Adam!" Jake shouted as he pushed the door fully open, revealing the messy apartment inside. Bottles littered the table, betting slips covered the floor, and Adam sat on the sofa with a cigarette dangling from his fingers. When he saw Jake, his face drained of color and he whispered, "Jake, listen, I can explain." But Jake didn't want explanations, he wanted the truth. He grabbed Adam by the collar and slammed him gently but firmly against the wall. "You sold our parents' house? The one I bought to protect them," he growled, eyes sharp with disappointment. Adam stuttered, "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I was just trying to pay some debts. I thought I could buy it back before anyone noticed." Jake's voice shook with anger as he said, "You promised you had changed. You lied. You've been lying for years." Adam lowered his eyes like a guilty child and whispered, "I'm sorry, Jake. I didn't think they'd get kicked out." Hearing that weak excuse snapped something inside Jake, but instead of yelling, a cold calm washed over him. "You didn't think because you never do," he said, releasing Adam and stepping back with a trembling breath. Adam tried to defend himself, saying, "The lenders threatened me, Jake. They said they'd come for me, and for you." But Jake shook his head, exhausted from all the years of covering for him. "You create your own disasters," he replied softly, which somehow hurt Adam more than shouting. Jake walked toward the door and added, "This time, you're going to face the consequences. I'm done saving you." And Adam finally realized that his brother meant it. The next morning, Jake filed a full report with the police, bringing every document he had kept since buying the Maplewood house. Officer Green, a calm and seasoned officer, listened carefully before saying, "This is serious fraud. We'll investigate immediately. Jake nodded, hands tightly clasped as he replied, I just want my parents safe. That's all I care about now. Over the next few days, Jake provided bank records, purchase receipts, and evidence of forgery, each piece tightening the case against Adam. The police summoned Adam for questioning, and forensics confirmed the signatures on the sale papers were fake. When Jake received the official call saying the case was strong enough to go to court, he sat in silence, feeling relief and heartbreak twined together. The court day arrived quickly, and the atmosphere felt heavy as Jake accompanied his parents into the cold, echoing courtroom. Adam sat on the opposite side, looking small, frightened, and nothing like the brother Jake used to admire as a child. Sarah kept wiping her eyes as she whispered, How did it come to this? While Daniel stared straight ahead, resigned. The judge reviewed the evidence carefully, purchase records, forged signatures, and testimony about the forced eviction. Jake listened quietly as the prosecutor said, the defendant knowingly committed fraud to obtain money through an illegal property sale. Adam couldn't meet Jake's eyes when the judge finally ruled the sale invalid. When the judge declared, the property is to be returned to its rightful owner immediately, Sarah gasped with relief and whispered a soft prayer. Adam received 2 years of probation, community service hours, and heavy fines, with the judge stating, this sentence is lenient only because no physical harm was inflicted. Jake watched Adam bow his head in shame, his shoulders shaking slightly as reality settled in. For a moment, Jake wondered if he should approach his brother, but the wound was far too fresh. Outside the courtroom, Sarah broke down crying, saying, I never wanted this for him, but I'm glad we can go home. And Jake placed a comforting hand on her back, silently agreeing. Returning the house to Maplewood should have brought peace, but the atmosphere inside felt hollow and wounded. Jake helped his parents move their few belongings back in, placing each item gently as if afraid the memories inside the walls might break. Sarah tried to smile as she said, At least we're back, but her eyes told a different story. Daniel sat silently at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair where Adam used to sit years ago. Jake tried to lighten the mood, sharing stories from flights and passengers, but the house remained quiet, heavy with unspoken grief. And Jake realized that while the legal battle was over, the emotional one had only begun. Weeks passed, and slowly life regained a routine, though the wound still lingered beneath the surface. Jake returned to flying, throwing himself into work to escape the heavy thoughts that followed him everywhere. Each time he visited Maplewood, he saw his parents trying to adjust, Sarah cooking again, Daniel tending the yard, both pretending everything was normal. Yet every night, Jake found them sitting quietly together, eyes distant, as if replaying the nightmare that had torn their family apart. He often lay in bed wondering, will things ever feel whole again? And knew the answer might be no, but he also sensed that the story was far from finished. And somewhere in the distance, the shadow of Adam still hovered, waiting for the next turn in their family's journey. Months passed quietly, but the silence in Maplewood never felt the same, like a house missing one of its pillars. Sarah often stood at the kitchen window, staring at the empty street as if expecting someone to walk up the path. Daniel tried to reassure her, saying, he'll learn his lesson this time, but even his voice lacked conviction. Jake called daily, sensing the heaviness in their tone even when they tried to sound cheerful. I'm fine, son, Sarah would insist, yet her voice always trembled slightly. And Jake, hundreds of miles in the sky during flights, felt the growing distance between what his parents said and what they truly felt. One cool Saturday evening, Jake visited for dinner, hoping to bring some warmth back into the home. As they ate, Sarah suddenly said in a small voice, Do you think Adam will ever come home? Daniel sighed deeply, staring at his plate before replying, He needs time, but we can't rush trust. Jake looked at both of them and admitted softly, I don't know when, but I hope he finds a better path. The room fell silent, broken only by the ticking wall clock and the soft hum of the refrigerator. That silence carried a weight that no meal or conversation could lift. A few months later, during one of Jake's return flights from Paris, he received a long trembling voicemail from Sarah. Her voice crackled under the sound of her tears as she said, Jake, your father, he collapsed. Come home right away. Jake froze in the airport corridor, the bustling noise fading into a distant echo behind him. He replayed the message twice, heart pounding as fear engulfed him. No, not Dad, he whispered, gripping his suitcase so tightly that his fingers ached. He immediately requested emergency leave and rushed toward the next available flight to Chicago, praying silently the whole way. When Jake reached the hospital, The fluorescent lights felt blinding, and the antiseptic smell clung to his clothes. Sarah sat in the waiting area, her face pale and swollen from crying, clutching a crumpled tissue tightly in her hand. "He's gone, Jake. Your father is gone," she whispered before collapsing into his arms. Jake felt his world tilt, the news crashing into him like a tidal wave he couldn't escape. "How? What happened?" he asked, barely able to speak as he held her trembling shoulders. She swallowed hard before saying, "Adam came this morning. They argued, and then your father's heart gave out." Jake felt a surge of rage explode inside him, burning hotter than anything he had felt before. "Where is he?" he demanded, voice sharp and filled with fury, but Sarah gripped his arm desperately. "Jake, no, please not now. We have to handle your father's arrangements," she cried softly. Jake clenched his jaw, struggling to focus on the heartbreaking reality rather than the anger tearing through him. He looked at the emergency room doors and whispered, "Dad, you didn't deserve this." And standing there, Jake knew the family had crossed a line that could never be undone. The funeral took place 3 days later, under gray skies and a cold wind that swept through the cemetery. Friends, neighbors, and old co-workers arrived, offering quiet condolences as the family stood near the casket. When the ceremony began, Jake spotted a familiar figure standing at the back, Adam, thin, disheveled and trembling. "Why is he here?" Jake muttered, fury already rising like smoke inside him. As soon as the service ended, Jake marched toward him, unable to contain years of hurt. "How dare you come here after everything you caused?" he roared, grabbing Adam's collar as mourners gasped. Adam stumbled backward, hands raised in panic as he said, "Jake, listen. I didn't mean for this to happen." But Jake shoved him again, anger boiling past reason. "You pushed him into his grave. Do you understand that?" he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of grief. Adam's eyes filled with tears as he whispered, "I never wanted Dad to die. I lost control. I was angry." Sarah rushed forward crying, "Stop. Jake, please stop. This isn't what your father would want." Jake finally let go, breathing heavily as Adam staggered away in shame. After the burial, the house felt unbearably empty, as if Daniel's presence had vanished from every corner. Sarah wandered from room to room, touching items that once belonged to him, his glasses, his old jacket, the tools in the garage. Jake cooked meals, cleaned, handled paperwork, and tried to anchor himself in routine, but nothing filled the void. Late at night, he heard his mother crying softly through her bedroom door. "I miss him so much," she whispered when Jake sat beside her, offering quiet comfort. And Jake, holding her hand, realized that grief had become a silent member of their household. 1 week later, a white envelope arrived addressed to both Jake and Sarah, with handwriting neither had seen in months. Inside was a shaky letter from Adam, apologizing for everything and admitting responsibility for the chain of events that led to Daniel's death. "I know I've caused too much pain," the letter read, "and I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say I'm sorry before I leave." Jake finished reading aloud, his voice tight as Sarah covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. Adam wrote that he planned to leave town to avoid bringing any further harm to them. And once the letter was finished, the house fell silent again, carrying a sorrow neither of them could fully express. From that day forward, Adam disappeared, leaving no trace except occasional whispers from people who claimed to have spotted him doing manual labor far from Chicago. Jake tried not to think about him, telling himself, "Some people can only be saved by distance." Sarah, though heartbroken, slowly regained strength as Jake helped her rebuild a smaller, quieter routine. They visited Daniel's grave often, laying flowers and sharing memories in soft voices. Through the months, life reshaped itself, not healed, but steadier, calmer, with fewer unanswered questions. And though Adam remained a ghost in their story, Jake felt that the end of this chapter was approaching, bringing both closure and a final acceptance of everything they had survived. As the first year without Daniel passed, Jake settled into a new rhythm between Chicago flights and weekends in Maplewood. He kept a close eye on his mother, making sure she ate well, attended church, and stayed connected with neighbors. Sarah slowly regained small pieces of joy, smiling again at the sight of blooming flowers or the smell of fresh coffee. "Your father would want us to keep living," she told Jake one morning, her voice soft but steady. Jake nodded, though he still carried the ache of loss inside him like a quiet shadow. And yet, he noticed the house felt less heavy, as if healing had begun silently beneath the surface. One afternoon, while Jake was preparing to return to Chicago for his next flight, Sarah approached him with a hesitant expression. "Do you ever think we'll see Adam again?" she asked, her fingers gently twisting the edge of her sweater. Jake paused, unsure how to answer, then replied softly, "If he's living a better life somewhere, maybe that's enough for now." Sarah sighed and nodded, though sadness flickered in her eyes. "I just hope he's safe," she whispered, staring out the window at the quiet street. Jake placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder and said, "Dad wanted peace for this family. Let's hold on to that." Time continued its slow healing, and soon, 2 full years had passed since Jake last saw his brother. Rumors occasionally surfaced. Someone claimed Adam was working construction in Ohio, another said he saw him washing dishes at a diner in Arizona. Jake listened but never chased the stories, believing that chasing ghosts would only reopen wounds. "If he's changing, he'll come on his own," Jake told Sarah whenever she asked. She accepted his words, though her eyes always drifted toward the front door when the evening breeze rustled the porch. And Jake wondered quietly whether some endings were simply meant to remain unfinished. On the 2nd anniversary of Daniel's passing, Jake and Sarah prepared flowers and drove to the cemetery under a calm autumn sky. Yellow leaves scattered along the path, and the cool wind brushed gently through the trees. Sarah walked slowly, leaning on Jake's arm as they approached the familiar headstone. "Your dad loved this season," she murmured, placing roses beside the grave. Jake smiled faintly and whispered, "He always said autumn felt like a soft goodbye." As they stood together, a quiet peace settled over them, until they noticed a man kneeling on the opposite side of the grave. The man's shoulders trembled as he wiped his eyes, unaware that anyone was watching. When he finally stood and turned, Jake felt his breath catch. Adam, thinner, older, but unmistakably Adam. Sarah gasped softly, covering her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. Adam froze, panic rising as he whispered, I didn't want to disturb you. I just came to see Dad." Jake stepped forward slowly, unsure whether to feel anger, relief, or something in between. And Adam lowered his head, preparing to run, as if expecting to be rejected again. But Sarah reached out first, her voice trembling as she said, "Adam, don't go yet. We've missed you." Adam's eyes widened with disbelief as he whispered, "Mom, I'm so sorry. I never meant for everything to end this way." Jake stood still, watching his brother's expression, one filled with exhaustion, regret, and a deep sorrow that seemed to weigh down his entire frame. "I've been trying to change," Adam continued softly. "I've been working hard jobs, staying away from gambling, trying to become someone Dad would be proud of." Jake finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "Change doesn't erase the past, Adam, but it matters." Adam nodded, tears rolling down his cheeks as he whispered, "I know, Jake. I'll carry what I did for the rest of my life." Sarah stepped closer, gently touching Adam's arm, and said, "Your father wanted peace for this family. If you're really trying, then that's all we can ask for now." And in that moment, something shifted, not forgiveness, but a small doorway to understanding. The three of them stood together in silence before Daniel's grave, letting the wind carry away years of bitterness and pain. Jake didn't pretend everything was fine, but he also didn't feel the same burning anger that once consumed him. "You look different," Jake said quietly, noticing Adam's calloused hands and tired eyes. Adam gave a faint smile. "Life teaches you fast when you lose everything," he replied. Sarah squeezed both their hands, whispering, "We can move forward, slowly but together." They walked back toward the car, the sun dipping behind the trees, casting warm golden light over the cemetery road. Adam stopped halfway and said, "I'm not asking to come home yet. I just wanted to say I'm alive, and trying." Jake studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Then keep trying," he replied softly. Sarah hugged Adam tightly, tears dripping into his shoulder as he whispered, "I love you, Mom. I always have." And though they parted ways again that day, something felt different, like a chapter ending gently instead of breaking apart. As Jake drove Sarah home, the sky glowed in soft shades of orange, and the wind carried a quiet calm that felt almost like healing. Sarah rested her head against the window, whispering, "Your father would be proud of how you kept this family alive." Jake smiled sadly, replying, "We're still standing, Mom. That's enough." At the Maplewood house, the porch light glowed warmly, the same light Sarah always turned on, like a quiet welcome for anyone who might return. Jake looked at the empty street, feeling hope and grief woven together like strands of the same thread. And as mother and son stepped inside, Closing the door gently behind them, Jake finally understood that some families survive not because they are perfect, but because they keep choosing to rise after every storm. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your reactions.